It's the last AMA of the year. So excited to see all of you folks join us. Thanks for taking the time, which I'm sure is a super busy time of year for all of you. And the lovely Tessa, who is our guest speaker today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Hello, everyone.
If you're new to product-led sales AMAs, this is a super casual conversation with go-to-market experts like Tessa. We're really here to facilitate an awesome conversation between all of you and Tessa, and she's here to answer all of your burning questions. Just so Tessa gets to know who's in the room today, if you could write your name, your company, and where you're based in the chat, that would be awesome. So we can get to know all of you. And if you're comfortable with cameras on, we always love to see everyone's faces. So it feels more like a conversation and we're not just talking to black Zoom screens. And hey, Alexa, you fixed your laptop problem.
I'm here. I am so sorry. My laptop just decided to explode on me.
Gotta love that. Last AMA of the year, your laptop was like, I am done. I'm over this.
I was so excited to chat with Tessa that I was like, I am gonna come to this chat even if I'm like FaceTiming in from my phone.
You made it. Okay.
How are you doing, Tessa?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited.
What did I miss, Sandy? Did I just completely interrupt?
No, I just did the usual upfront housekeeping. Everyone's adding their names into the chat, but I haven't introduced Tessa yet. So over to you.
Amazing. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. And thank you for Sandy taking over while I was not able to work a computer. But Tessa, I am so excited for this chat. Tessa is an incredible kind of pre and post sales leader, and now gotten to know you a bit when we were preparing for this conversation. And I just think and being a customer of Pocus, and I think there's just so much that the community is going to learn today. So I'm excited to dive in, and maybe you can start with a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Tessa. I lead customer success at Loom, and we'll definitely get into what that means because I know customer success means a lot of different things at a lot of different companies. But I did start my career on the pre-sale side, so sales engineering. I was at a company called Exactly for a while. I went to a really small startup where I got some pre-revenue experience, learned about product market fit, which is very important. I was at a company called SalesLoft leading CS for a while, and have been at Loom for almost 4 years now. So it's been a really wild ride, and leading the entire post-sales journey. So everything from onboarding all the way through to renewal and expansion.
That is awesome. So something that we talked about, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions, but other folks, feel free to just, unmute and ask questions or raise your hand or write in the chat. Something that we talked about that really stood out to me is kind of the evolution of what CS at Loom looked like. So you started with a team of generalists and then you moved into kind of specializing. Can you talk a little bit about that journey of CS at Loom and kind of how it started, where it is today, and what that looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think this is really common among startups, but yes, our team definitely started out as generalists, and my team is so wonderful, but what I started to see was we were really becoming like jack of all trades, masters of none. Like we were trying to focus on onboarding, but then we were having a bunch of renewal conversations. Then we were trying to find expansion opportunity. And truthfully, when CS owns renewals are always going to be priority one. And so even if you're trying to focus on earlier in the customer journey, it really tends to kind of bubble up that you're really focused on that renewal process. That's what you're talking about in your one-on-ones and your forecasts. And so that's when I really realized the need for specialization, having teams that are focused on the revenue side of the house and then teams that are focused on adoption and even adoption at scale. So at the time I was reporting to our CEO. So when you report to a CEO, and Alexa can attest to this, it's all about the business case, right? So you've really got to go in there and make a business case for why you're looking to make a change on the team. And so we started with proposing an experiment where we actually would take someone off of owning a book of business and have them focus on more adoption programs. adoption is so key to retention and renewal, as any CSM knows. And so we took someone off of the owning a book of business. We put them into a role where they were focused on the short experiment of just running webinars and driving adoption at scale that way. And we saw a huge increase in recording adoption. So it was a successful experiment. We had our metrics we wanted to hit. There were even some like hand raisers that led to additional revenue. And so we continued to build this program out. So we started with someone who was focused on scaled programs that kind of went all up and down our book of business so anyone could attend. And then from there, we were like, okay, now where else in the customer journey are we noticing that there's not enough focus and attention? And the kind of next place that we focused on was onboarding. And we actually took onboarding off of the customer success team's place, and we built out an onboarding team. And so that onboarding team was really focused on their only goal was like hitting exit criteria in the first 60 days. And then we saw our rates of hitting exit criteria almost double just in the first quarter of having this onboarding team.
It's very kind of like resonates and with every founder I talk to and kind of myself, and just it makes a lot of sense. And when you think about CS and just the entire post-sales customer journey, it covers so many functions. Like you said, there's renewals and there's onboarding, and kind of there's always some things that are going to take priority. And sometimes early days, you're doing a little bit of everything, and then you have to move into specializing. How did you decide, like, okay, we're going to chunk out this like function, and then we're going to move on to onboarding, and then in these other different teams? How did you figure out when it was the right time to start specializing or separating a function from just the generalist CS work?
Yeah, I actually wish I would have started earlier. So I'll answer both questions, because I think how we decided where to start is we just identified where it was like the most risk and the most pain. And it was that adoption piece, that like middle part of the customer journey. We were just noticing when we were having renewal conversations, like the end users were not getting enough touch points. And so I think look at your customer journey and then focus on like, where is the most pain and where are activities that you could actually scale out? So maybe like you're running a ton of trainings on an individual basis. Like, can you scale that? Can you build a repeatable process? Can you make that more efficient? So that's where we started in terms of when. Like I said, I wish we had started a little bit earlier. I think your instinct is, okay, I want to start specializing on my team, so I need to add headcount. But right now we're in this place where like headcount isn't so abundant.
Oh, you're on mute now. Right when I was getting good.
I don't know why it muted me. Sorry. I was just saying. And then the next piece is you might think you want to add headcount, but headcount's not like so abundant. And so I actually looked at my team and like the skill set of my team. There were people on my team who really love that commercial piece and working with our largest customers. And then I had someone on my team who was like really operationally minded, and they were always building dashboards and looking at data. And that was the individual that I shifted into a programs role. And so you really can actually look at your team and kind of start to specialize just based on the profiles on your existing team.
Yeah, it's such two things that really stood out to me. One is the point of specializing doesn't mean you need to add headcount. It means kind of allocating resources in a way of, this person's really good at this, and there's a pain in the business. Let's kind of put them on that kind of pain. And I like the point you made of A, starting earlier than maybe you think you need, and B, also finding the areas of the business that there is pain, and B, you think that there's ways to scale it and make it more efficient. So that actually, it's a very, very, very good point that I think when I think of like specializing, I do think of hiring different types of people. Something that you and I also talked about is the difference between a scaled CS team and a dedicated strategic CS team, and how you can kind of take different programs from scaled and apply it to dedicated. Before we talk about that, can you just tell me a little bit about basics. What's the difference? How are the teams structured? What does onboarding look like in each of those teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with like the definition or how I think about scaled success, which is you're still trying to help your customers realize value, but you're doing it more efficiently. So it is about meeting customers where they're at, especially in the self-serve world. People don't always want to talk to a person. So it's meeting them where they're at, at the right time. And so we do have a scaled CS team, and I actually really specialized in the scaled CS world. But these programs do apply up and down our chain. So we have someone that's focused on building scaled programs, but we invite the Atlassians and the HubSpots of the world to join these programs. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well, as when you start building out your webinars or thinking about running like async QBRs. And I'm happy to talk about like the programs that we've built. They don't just have to apply to your SMB customers. So I think that's a really important point, is that these programs can apply up and down the chain. So when you are taking someone off of your team and putting them on programs, it's not like you have less resources up market. Our dedicated team, they do own a book of business, and they are really focused on partnering on strategic initiatives. So that's a really a big focus for them. They are focused on also finding net new opportunities and multi-threading and really understanding the detailed pain. So they are I try to stay away from building relationships, but they really are partnering with customers on strategic initiatives. So I think that is probably the biggest difference between our scaled and our dedicated team. But our dedicated team is leveraging the scaled programs. And then we have our onboarding team, who is just owning that first part of the customer journey. And they have 2 tracks. They have a dedicated track that a customer goes through and a scaled track that the customer goes through. And just to add another kind of layer of complexity, it's not about ARR necessarily. If there are customers that are larger, but they are more comfortable with async, again, it's about meeting them where they're at. And so we'll have them they can leverage our async content and Looms.
That was such an aha moment for me when you were like, so you can do the scaled approach to massive enterprise companies. I was like, what do you mean, Tessa? And you're getting there's a lot of like threads we can pull there. I'm going to go over to the chat first, but I feel like there's so many more questions I could ask. Sam, some more of a technical question that folks want to know is, what does the scale CS book size look like?
Yeah. So again, think about it in terms of, so we have on our scale team, we have someone who owns renewal. So we have like a renewal specialist. We have our scaled CSM, who actually does own like the smaller customers. And then we have our programs person. So I think a lot of times in companies where they just like have scaled focus on like ARR thresholds and they don't have that programs person, you can only own like 200 accounts at a time. It's a pooled model. Our scaled CSM actually can own a book of 400. She has 400 accounts. So she can own a bit more because she has her renewal specialist to rely on, and she's like sending people to programs. So I think also it helps you because individuals can own a larger book of business.
It's incredible how you've done that and like how you're able to manage a book that size, which is awesome. Something I'm very excited that someone else asked is async QBRs. How do you do that? What has worked? What has not worked? What have you learned?
Yeah. So I might have to go on like a little bit of a tangent on this one, because this is something I'm very passionate about, which is like kind of getting rid of the concept of these like quarterly business reviews in the CS world, which I know is a little bit scary. But like, I don't know, Alexa, the last time you sat on a QBR, but it's like the people you want in the room, they're not going to be there. And it's really daunting to sit on a quarterly business review, and you're like at Loom, for example, like if we're running a quarterly business review, we're like, hey, Alexa, you've saved 10,000 hours this quarter, like working with Loom. And there's something about that just, doesn't resonate. This is coming from the CRO at Catalyst told me this, and I'll see if I can get it out right. But I think this is really important, which is like people will actually work harder for smaller amounts of money if it's coming in like frequent if it's coming in frequently and it's a surprise. So they actually will work harder for smaller amounts of money versus like, okay, I'm getting this consistent paycheck every quarter. That's just like psychology. And so we've translated that into how we provide value for our customers. So instead of doing these like big quarterly QBRs, we want to provide them like these little aha moments. And so we'll do that via Loom. And so just like every so often, we'll send them a Loom with like a moment of value or a moment of impact. Like instead of, hey, you saved 10,000 hours, like, hey, this one Loom got this view from your CEO. Like, that's amazing. So when you start having these renewal conversations throughout the year, they've had these like stair steps of value versus like these big, massive moments. So I actually have, we have a webinar about our async QBR. It's on our support page. I'll try to find the link. But we have templates for async QBRs. So you can definitely go and check those out for sure. But they're essentially just Looms that provide like little moments of value.
That is, like Sandy said in the chat, I think that is such a good idea that we're going to now go take back to Pocus. It is such a, like, people want the incremental wins and to constantly like know how are they using your product and how can they actually, you know, see the value, smaller values more often rather than you have to get on this meeting once a quarter, which is super, super cool. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, maybe we can even post afterwards where we can learn more about that. It looks like Daniel says, did your dedicated and scaled CS teams have the same goals? How do you think about goal setting for scaled?
Yeah, so our team goal is net revenue retention and adoption. So the entire team is focused on net revenue retention and adoption. This is something that we're kind of iterating on, but right now we are actually on a team goal. The reason being, we're actually moving accounts around throughout the year. So accounts will grow out of scale. And so we'll kind of like push them to our dedicated team, or on our dedicated team, we'll realize like, hey, you know, this account is chugging along. They don't need as much like interaction. We can actually just push them into our scaled digital touch points and they don't need a dedicated CSM. So, you know, figuring out comp and targets is always difficult, but right now our team is on this team goal and it is providing this like level of like cohesiveness and not as much like concern about accounts moving from CSM to CSM or from like programs to dedicated.
Totally. That makes sense. And I would be curious, something we talked about. So you have scaled, you have more strategic, traditional CS. We talked about kind of understanding the like ability to evolve the team. What about your experience working with other teams? So something I've noticed about you is you're very operational and very cross-functional, and you work with marketing or sales or other teams. Can you talk a little bit about what that cross-functional, what has worked for you? Because I think it's really hard. Some CS should be so cross-functional because you're taking everything you're learning from the customer and should be feeding it back to the company, but it's obviously easier said than done. So tell us the secret sauce of how you make that happen.
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is like when you're going through that OKR planning process, like ensuring whoever is like the voice in the room is making sure that everyone's objectives are aligned. So, you know, marketing is not just focused on pipeline. They have some sort of adoption goal. Like adoption should be a cross-functional goal. So I think that's the first thing, is just making sure goals are aligned. Like for us, for example, sales, one of their objectives, they actually have an expansion component where 6 months after they close a deal, they're still getting paid on any expansion. So they're bought into making sure there's successful onboarding. So I think having objectives aligned is really, really key. So we start there, and that way, like our sales to CS handoff is very smooth because the sales team is really invested. When we're talking about like customer marketing and lifecycle marketing, it makes the lifecycle marketing team more invested when you start there. I think we've done a really good job of that with sales, and we're working with the marketing team on that for FY24. The second thing that's really important when working cross-functionally is making sure you're mapping out the customer journey and you have this single pane of glass. Small plug across sales, marketing, and success. We use Pocus and we find it really helpful for us. because we can see all of like the playbooks that are happening and make sure that like the customer journey is cohesive. So whatever tool you're using, just make sure everybody has visibility across the org in terms of like which emails are going out, which webinars people are joining, which playbooks are running, and tools like Pocus can help you with that.
I so appreciate the plug, and we love working with your team. So it is an honor for us to get to work across all of your teams. And I didn't even see Sandy's question before, but I think this ties into what we were talking about before. Is there any kind of overlap between scaled CS world and lifecycle marketing?
Yeah. And so I think it totally depends on like your company and your goals in terms of like how you differentiate. For us, lifecycle marketing, like will be a little bit more focused on like the end user and have more programmatic, like, oh, when you sign up for a Loom, they're focused on those emails. Our digital success is really focused on the admin and making sure the admin is like set up properly. So that's kind of how we've broken it up. But I think like, again, at the beginning of any quarter, just like make sure you have a customer journey mapped, you know, like who's in when, and that it's cohesive, however you want to like break up ownership.
Totally. You're making everything sound so easy. you're I feel like you've just figured it all out. And like this is the obvious answer from Tessa. It's just very impressive how you all have such kind of, you have been able to create great kind of cross-team collaboration across sales, marketing, and CS, which is not an easy task. Going into the Gail's question, so this is a little bit of a different topic, going back to the specialization conversation, what headcount does it make sense to do that? Like how many CS folks do you actually need to really start to specialize?
You know, I think scaled success is so important from even like maybe not day one, maybe if you only have a few customers, it's okay for that one person to just be talking and learning. But once you kind of like understood what customers care about, like even if you have 2 people, you can have that second person dedicating, you know, 40% of their time to just have one webinar or one email going out, because you're going to set yourself up for success. So I think like setting up the foundations early is really important. And if I'm making this sound easy, it is not, because you really have to start with foundations. Like your data is going to be so key. But like I'm, you know, I'm very envious of people who are like starting from the beginning, because you can set up foundations and you don't have to have this kind of like Frankenstein thing going on, or where you have to like rip and replace tools. You can really start from the beginning with like making sure, okay, what are the top 3 metrics we care about that's going to like trigger some type of content? What content do we think is going to resonate the most? But I would say, you know, start early so you can build on those foundations.
Yeah, it's a theme of from you. It's a theme of starting earlier than you think you might have to start, which makes sense. And it always kind of it's every great CS leader I've met is very operational in the way that they think. And I think it's just so important to make sure you remember it's about being customer facing and delight and bringing that customer feedback, but also how do you make things as efficient as possible. Sam asked, can you go into a bit more detail on the role of your program managers?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I could talk about Hadley all day long. She's currently on mat leave, but when she gets back, Hadley Springer, look her up on LinkedIn. But she is amazing, and she is really, really operational. So she was that individual that I kind of noticed, like she was the one kind of in and building out a dashboard and like getting really efficient with her book of business and really understood the data and what matters most. And so, but her role again is like building out these programs that are focused on our skilled book, but also like when we realize things are working there, pushing them up market. But Sam, I'm happy to talk about like specific programs she's run and how she partners cross-functionally. But if you want to come off mute, if you have like something specific in mind you'd want to learn more about her role, happy to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the nature of my question, I think I'm curious to what type of program she was running. Like, was it customer outreach programs? Was it email campaigns? Like, what do they consist of from a scaled perspective?
Yeah. So, and I keep saying webinars because I do think that is like really efficient, especially if you can figure out the webinars. And like, so in Notion, Hadley actually has this experiment tracker. So she owns everything from webinars to email campaigns to like Loom programs to she built our original async onboarding. And what she would do is she would make everything a short time box experiment. And she would say, okay, I have this hypothesis. So, you know, one of them was like a license allocation campaign. So if people dip below 80% in license allocation, I'm going to send them this 3-step email to try and boost license allocation. Like my hypothesis is X. My goal is that they'd get to 90% after this 3-step email campaign. And then she'd measure it over time. And if it was successful, we'd keep it going. So that was one. Our team, Hadley, along with Brittany, who runs our onboarding programs, who is also wonderful, they wanted to run a change management webinar, which was much more like thought leadership. Like, can we get people in to talk to them about how do you shift to async work? And we had a hypothesis, we put it in our experiment tracker, and there was like very low attendance, and it did not impact recording adoption at all. So that is one that we were like, let's fail fast and learn, like for what, like, let's uncover why that didn't work. And it was really that it was not persona or use case specific. Like people are so focused on jobs to be done right now that like the thought leadership webinars were just not resonating. But when we were like, hey, if you join like our Loom for sales, our Loom for CS, those webinars were so, I think we had something like 5,000 registrants. And we actually measured recording adoption before and after. And we saw a 30% increase in recording adoption for our sales webinars.
Wow.
So again, I think it's like starting with like hypothesis, having like an idea of success criteria, putting in a pre-mortem, like, hey, if this doesn't work, what are we going to do? And then just tracking those. And the ones that work, keep those going and make them a part of your process. And the ones that don't work, just cut them, stop. Don't spend your time on them. Like, again, we're big fail fast and learn people.
It's an incredible point of the experiments, like remembering that a win in an experiment is if you fail, if you just learn something fast. We've had a lot of experiments at Pocus where it's like, all right, we learned that that's not the channel we want to pursue, or that's not the experiment we want to run. And I think of those as a win, because then you don't have to do it again, or you do it differently and you learn something new. But Tessa, this was amazing. This was so much tactical advice. We covered a lot in 30 minutes. It was rapid fire. And we really, really, really appreciate all of your incredible insights into scaled and specializing in virtual QBRs and program managers and all of this. So yeah, I feel like we could have done like a whole day of an interview with you. But thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. And thank you to the community for your incredible questions.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And yeah, if you want to add me on LinkedIn, definitely do that. And then I will provide Alexa with that webinar around like async QBRs and Loom for CS. A lot of learnings in that as well. So we'll make sure to get you all of that good content.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, Tessa. Thanks, everybody.